So, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming, those of you who are here face to face. And welcome to all of those who are following online. My name is Norman Curtis. I'm the Vice Deacon of the School of Human Sciences and Technology of the University of Lille. The IE University is our official name. A lot of people call us the Instituto de Empresa in Spain. Today's subject is innovating in higher education. There's nothing new about this. This is obviously something that's been discussed for decades. And it's always been said that many of the skills that people have been trained in university are not well aligned with the work market. So a lot of employers criticize the university system. They're saying, look, they're not preparing people for the way we'd like them to. They don't have the right skills for the job market. I don't know if we're going to be able to solve this problem. It's a very complex one. But at least my aim as a moderator is to share our points of view with people. So, a few issues that we're going to talk about. Is it true that universities aren't developing the right skills for the work market? How can we improve that? What are the keys that we need to focus on? Those of us who work in higher education. What experiences have worked and what hasn't worked? What effect has digitalisation had and will have in higher education in the work market? We're already seeing some of these effects. And finally, what are the most important skills nowadays? My first challenge as moderator, and the most important one, is to try and summarise the CVs of the 4 people who are with me today in less than 2 minutes. It's impossible, but I'm going to give it a shot. So I'm going to focus on what they're doing right now. I'm going to start with Mercedes, who's with me now, and she's smiling because she knows her CV better than me, and she knows that it's impossible to summarize it in 2 minutes. So it'll take an hour just to present the panelists. So we've got Mercedes Valcalcer here. Welcome, Mercedes, who's the General Director of the Fundación Generation Spain. As you know, this is promoted by McKinsey, and its aim is to reduce unemployment and provide training in those areas where they can help people who are unemployed. She's done a lot of important things in her life. She's created a lot of companies. She's a teacher, and I'm sure she'll be able to share a few anecdotes with us. And then online, we have Victoria Galan Muros. Oh, yeah, there she is. Hello, Victoria. Hello, welcome. She's head of research and analysis in UNESCO, and she's worked in the crossover between universities, companies, and governments in more than 30 countries. She's an expert in the connection, management, and innovation in higher education. She used to be head of research in the Global Institute on Innovation Districts and analyst in the OECD. Welcome, Victoria. Then we have Joaquin Guerra. Hello. Good morning from Mexico. It's great to see you. Good morning. I don't know if you're in Texas or Mexico, but Joaquin is academic vice rector and head of innovation in the Monterrey Technological University. He's had a lot of very important roles and positions in many places, but now he's focused on developing the development of the new educational model, which they call Tech 21, and we'll talk about that later. He's been a consultant for strategic planning for governments, companies, and schools, and General Director of Technology in Monterrey in a number of areas. Finally, Carlos, we work in the same institution. Welcome, Carlos Lastra. Hello, good morning to everyone. Or good afternoon, good morning from California anyway. Yes, Carlos is in California. He's assistant professor in the IE, the School of Global and Public Affairs, and Director of Research in the Center for the Governance of Change. And we'll talk a little bit about what this center does, which is related to today's topic. His research interests focus on something which is relevant today, which is the intersection between economics, politics, and educational policies. So that's very relevant to today's topic. So I think I've managed to face up to the first challenge, which was difficult. So we've got our first question for our esteemed panelist, and I'll start with Mercedes. It's the same question for everyone, just to really set the scene so we get to know the panelists so they can share their point of view. So Mercedes, in the short term, how can education help us fill existing job vacancies, which is not occurring now? Could it be something more related to technology and data, or could it be in other areas? Perhaps there are other areas that aren't covered. What do you think?
Well, for our part, we think that there's a certain cultural bias, particularly in Spain, although it does happen in many other countries in the world, as regards the profiles of people who enter companies. I think there's a standard idea. If you have a programmer, for example, whether it's Python or Java or whatever, companies think that the ideal thing is to have a computing engineer, and we forget about everybody else because I've got this sorted in the medium term. But what we've seen is that regardless of your former education, you have perhaps greater or less difficulty. It's a question of time, really, to be able to have access to technological knowledge that you need to be able to do this kind of job. But it's also very important, this part of competence, of skills. So what we've seen is that with training, which is perhaps very not long term, because we've got very perhaps orientated to jobs. We have 12 or 14 week courses on technology. So regardless of your profile, your academic profile beforehand, you can do a job with high quality in technology in those professions. So, and once you've defined a CV where you bring in the needs of the company for this type of job, the very technical part, or the competences, skills, mindset, etc. Once you've detected really, along with companies, what are the critical points, the critical aspects which differentiate one person with a very high profile, what differentiates them from everybody else. So once you've got all this information in your CV and your curriculum, if you have a very practical focus, you have professionals who are well trained, who are well educated and prepared for what the company is looking for at that moment. So for us, I think it's a mix of what does a company really need, not just in terms of the post itself, but what does that involve, and look at curriculums that really cover all this information. So the challenge is, which is always the most complicated thing, is a cultural break with who should cover a particular type of job.
Yes, and a lot of countries, including Spain, there's often a bias against people who don't have this specific academic training. And they're looking for certain types of training, and sometimes it's difficult to then retrain them. They might have experience in other areas, and it's difficult to retrain them. And also, in addition to technology, you talked about skills. Are there any areas that you think, other than technology, where there are a lot of relevant posts to be filled?
Sectores de actividad. Por ejemplo, la calidad en el servicio de todo lo que es el mundo de venta, retail, ahí tiene un reto también muy importante ligado tanto a conocimientos técnicos como a parte competencial. Hemos detectado también que hay demandas sin cubrir respecto a lo que están demandando las empresas en sectores como economía verde, por ejemplo, que además va a crecer muchísimo. En España, en concreto, los temas de hostelería también van a tener una gran demanda, y todo el sector de salud y dependencia. Y en todos los casos, en general, el déficit de profesionales con los requisitos que están demandando las empresas está muy centrado no solo en una formación técnica específica, sino especialmente en toda la parte competencial y de mentalidades. Bueno, en el mundo que vivimos, que es una locura para todos, ya incluso prepandemia, no voy a decir nada ahora mismo, lo que está demostrado es que tienes que tener mucha capacidad de adaptación al entorno y una vocación, lo que son las mentalidades, de aprendizaje permanente, mentalidad de crecimiento, responsabilidad personal, que es lo que realmente va a marcar la diferencia respecto a otras personas para tu incorporación en el mercado laboral. Entonces, en el mundo tecnológico, el gap, o sea, la brecha entre la demanda de profesionales por las empresas y los profesionales formados para los puestos quizás sea algo más visible que en otros sectores, pero esta realidad se está produciendo en muchos sectores de actividad.
Perfecto, muchísimas gracias, Mercedes.
Yes, okay, thank you very much, Mercedes. Now we're going to hear from Joaquin. Hello. How are you doing? Yes, it's great to be here with you. Yeah, well, I'm very pleased to see you here. Remember the question, in the short term, how can education help to cover existing job posts and which aren't being filled now? What's your view? Yes, I completely agree with what Mercedes has just said. And I would add about this issue that in universities, what we're really looking for is this strong link to the productive sectors or the public sector to understand what their needs are, and so that we can rapidly incorporate them into our teaching plans. So this strong link, creating advice and getting advice on how we can improve our university degrees. We can create alternative programs with microcredits, which can involve a quick short-term training so that we can convert or reconvert certain skills. Now, I'd focus on certain short-term actions, but I'd really like to stress that it's impossible for all universities again to find perfect work areas. I mean, the important thing, and this is what we look for in Monterrey, is that we need to train entrepreneurs. It's very important that universities who have a lot of train people for the right sort of skills that they're required in companies. But in the short term, we need to do this. And we need to get entrepreneurs, people with this hunger, with this spirit, with this mindset to go out and create employment. Not just go out and get a job, but to create jobs for other people, because that's what our societies need. And this is in addition to all of these skills and digital aspect, the ability to create companies that create jobs, because that's so important in our communities and society. That's very interesting, Joaquin. I mean, everyone, yes, training entrepreneurs. Now, have you seen a significant percentage in terms of the students interested in the world of entrepreneurship in higher education? Because there is a view that a lot of entrepreneurs get their sort of freelance, they're a little bit anti-higher education in some sense. What's been your experience of that? Well, the young people, they come here to get a degree, and they do it because they think about their future, because they want to enter the work market and be successful and get somewhere. There's no doubt about that. But in universities, I think that we're obliged to train them with a lot of tools that they might not even have considered, but we're giving them options, we're opening doors. And so the student, when he or she finishes, they can say, look, I want to get more experience and I want to have a great career, why not? But often we're asked to create more jobs. And we're doing that in university. This mindset is very important. And yes, we have great examples of entrepreneurs. And there are a lot of entrepreneurs who have been trained in university and they can go ahead and be very successful. Well, yes, we see this in a lot of the universities. There are a lot of information they have in terms of the number of unicorns that have come from them, the universities, the number of them that have become listed companies. And it's interesting what you said about changing the mindset of these boys and girls, so they don't just think about finding a job, but also creating jobs right from the beginning. This is something that we can probably all apply. So thank you very much, Joaquin. Now, Victoria, welcome. I think you know the question now, so Victoria's going to be with couldn't be with us face to face. She was going to be with us face to face, but she had a little bit of help on them. But I see that you're well. You seem well. So thank you very much for being here, or even though this is just on the screen. So thank you very much, Victoria. What are your short-term views for filling these job gaps?
Pregunta cuando tienes tan buenas respuestas antes no lo hace más fácil. Yo quizá tomando un poquito otro ángulo, reflexionar en lo que ha dicho Mercedes de que este gap de habilidades no es nuevo, existía antes del COVID, las previsiones apuntaban a que iba a incrementar, pero es ahora en el último año que el COVID ha digitalizado nuestros empleos y nuestras vidas en general, que de otra forma se dice que hubiéramos tardado de 5 a 10 años. El incremento del número de puestos de trabajo para los que no hay oferta, yo creo que es más amplio que nunca. El futuro del trabajo del que hablábamos realmente es hoy, lo tenemos, se nos ha echado encima de repente. Está claro que el tiempo apremia y que en el corto plazo pues hay que formar a la población adulta para dos cosas. Por un lado, desarrollar estos expertos en nuevas tecnologías, pero también proveer de habilidades digitales a la población adulta en general, porque también otros empleos que no necesariamente son digitales se están digitalizando. Entonces vamos buscando, yo creo que de manera muy simplificada y muy general, esos dos perfiles, expertos en tecnologías y también personas con habilidades digitales también. Y es verdad que llevamos viendo durante los últimos años pues todas las microcredenciales de las que hablaba también Joaquín, si bien se expresan por digital budgets, los bootcamps que tienen unas tasas de empleabilidad altísimas, todos los MOOCs que ahora ponen a disposición de todo el mundo la educación de las mejores universidades del mundo, pero también certificados profesionales como por ejemplo los de Google.
And Google, they have this cloud architecture which provides a salary of $175,000. So this is done this course can be done in 6 months. So what we have to see what we're really looking for and what we value. So who are the current suppliers? And we find that at this moment the universities are not the key suppliers. We have very few, usually they're private ones. It's usually companies and employers that go beyond the training of their employees and tend to be in the top positions of these training courses. So in this forum last year, it was said that there's a sector with a huge profit margin, and companies want to maintain this and have to keep changing and expand to sectors which give them these wide margins. So we have many companies that traditionally have not really concentrated in education and now are entering this panorama. So most of the universities which are focused towards these typical degree courses, 3 or 4 years, but now we have to think that it's not that they don't know what the needs are, but they need. The problem is that when we think about research, we say to the rectors and the deans, why don't you have more courses of this type? Why don't you offer machine learning and artificial intelligence? Because we need experts. We like to offer these type of courses, but the kids, what they learn is the disciplines, and because what happens is the salaries in those disciplines are much higher. So what Joaquin said, if we don't have experts in the universities that can give those kind of courses, universities have to be prepared to change and to be able to bring in these courses to be able to train talent, and otherwise talent will have to be trained always in companies. And also I think we should reflect upon 1 or 2 risks. We have an urgency we need to have staff, personnel to be trained to be able to handle these jobs. But I think we're not talking so much about this risk of not being able to fill these places, but what is the smallest unit of learning? I think after one or two few hours, we can perhaps give people certificates, but do we need the same number of hours to learn everything? Can we learn certain things really quickly? But there is a risk there of I think most of these micro credentials or courses are not accredited. They're not official. So they don't necessarily have to be poor quality, but they might be. There's nobody that can ensure the quality there. So I think if we have to look at quality agencies in higher education, I think what is clear is that we have to do this quickly, and we come to a point where there are almost too many courses out there, that means that it's very confused when you're trying to work out what the courses are and what the qualifications are, particularly for employers. How can they assess what each of those really means? But I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Yes, that's very interesting, Victoria.
Educativo que nos podríamos estar días hablando sobre.
The whole disruptive process in education, so that's very interesting. Yes, the issue of micro-credentials, in my opinion, what we're seeing now is that, as you're saying, that there's a lot of oversupply and there's a lack of clarity amongst all of this. But within a few years, these have been is going to be stabilized, consolidated. It's like what we see with universities and in education in general. This is very interesting. Yes, thank you very much, Victoria. Carlos. I was going to say best for last, but the last one in the order. What do you think about this, Carlos? You talked about the future of work. And now this is one of your areas of expertise, isn't it? How do you see this issue of covering up these gaps? Yes, well, we can talk more about the report if you want that we did on end of master's theses. But I'd like to say something, well, really focus on a couple of extra things. What we shouldn't do to reduce the existing skills gap is to just follow which would be the natural tendency, which is to create just new degrees or new masters. In Spain, there are 2,854 different degrees. And a degree in one university, and the degree is different from the same degree in another university. So the students have 2,854 different options. And what we shouldn't be doing is just adding even more degrees by adding to more confusion, creating new academic programs. In order to try and fill this skills gap. And this is what I want to focus on. I mean, this is what the other speakers have very eloquently said. Margarita talked about what a generation is doing in Spain and other countries. And there's micro-credentials and less substantial courses, or at least shorter courses. And that's what's happening in many universities. On the other hand, what should happen, and it's the other aspect of this, and where almost nothing has been invested, I think, is directing candidates. I think that within all of this supply that Victor was talking about, which is very confusing, all of the different degrees on offer, the types of credentials, and the outlook of the work market in the future, I think that the 17-year-old students don't have much understanding. They really make choices half blind. They really don't know much about what they're choosing. And they have to go through all the rigidity of these degrees over 3 or 4 years, and then they start again choosing masters or other types of credentials. And the same thing happens in a different way in the university programs. During those 3 or 4 years of undergraduate degree, generally, and at least according to the information we have, they receive quite deficient information, or really, they're not really well guided at all. There's no good guidance for these students, and once they're and guidance for students when they actually get a job. So they don't really tell them much about the work market and how it matches their choice of degree. Now, I would also, like my colleagues, emphasize these two aspects. The huge number of programs that already exist, where the students spend years studying, and then the sort of guidance that these students should be given about these academic programs and while they're studying them as well. Yes, Carlos, I think that's very interesting what you're saying. We see this at the level of school and secondary school, where the more elitist private schools do have good guidance when it comes to universities, but they're very much focused on which university they should apply to, where you should study. But it's difficult to really guide students to tell them what sort of degree they should choose, because it's been shown that 78% of teenagers don't know what they want to study. Well, yes, I could be more provocative, but it is true there's a very intensive way of doing it, which is to have people who can go to these schools, who can give this guidance, but in a world of Amazon and Google apps, they know so much about us. I think it would be impossible. I'm sure there could be some artificial intelligence system with with no marginal cost at all that could be used as a starting point for giving academic guidance to these kids, and could be of good quality. Yes, Victoria was talking about new business options, and so then maybe this is a good option here. We could talk about that maybe. Yes, thanks very much, Carlos. Now I'm going to ask a question specifically to all of you. I'm going to start with Joaquin. Joaquin, now really focusing on academic training through this Tech 21 program, which I talked before, can you tell us why and how the educational model is being reinvented? Because it's got a very wide focus, hasn't it? It talks about skills, customization. It's quite macro. And for those who don't know, it's a very large university with a lot of students. It's quite complex and very successful. So Joaquin, could you tell us about this? Yes, I'd be very happy to. Yes, you've said it. Tech 21 is really our hope for the future as a university. It's like going to the moon for us. And it's the biggest transformation we've had in the 75 years of our history as a university. We're a private and non-for-profit university where we exist in 26 cities around Mexico, more than nearly 6,000 students. And the educational model has been transformed for all professional degrees, or for all professional careers rather. And what we've seen is that in 2011, 2012, we started to question everything that we were doing, or at least part of what we're doing today. And we're thinking about what the future will be of society, what is being demanded of us, and we wanted to see how we can have education with a greater impact. And the first thing that happened was that we created a benchmark in 50 universities around the world, and looking at what sort of transformation they're creating. And we had these direct contact with the companies and organizations to really understand what their needs were. And then after a long analysis and benchmarking and all of this, we decided that we needed a new educational model based on education for skills. We're not, inventing the wheel here, but we just wanted to understand what it is that the work market needed and how we could incorporate it into our educational programs. We spent a number of years designing this. We started in 2011, 2012. And it was a design based on skills, where the main focus on skills was goal-based learning. So a goal, a challenge, is a real-world problem designed by a company or by a government or by civil society organization, designed alongside the teachers and with students in mind. And so they learn by solving these challenges and developing specific skills according to the challenges that they overcame. And it was defined according to disciplines, but also cross-cutting skills for general education. And this is very important, and we'll talk about that later. It's related to critical thinking, problem solving, communication, international view, technological skills. Civil responsibility, ethics. So why am I talking about this? Well, it's because this ensures both the development of technical skills as well as cross-cutting general skills at the same time. And this was designed for all of our courses within the college. And in 2019, we started with our first generation to begin this program. There's a lot of details. I could talk about them another time, but just to give you an idea of this, the main challenge, of course, was the organizational change, because this required change in how the university was managed. It required change in how teachers educate. And the most interesting thing, I think, at the end of the day, apart from achieving all of these things and developing our students, was that we're completely transforming the mindset, the approach to education from an administrative point of view, from in terms of the teachers, the students, and in terms of what society needs. And that was what we did. It was like our trip to the moon, and the rocket has set off. The difficulty is going to be coming back, of course. That's always more difficult. And that's when I hope to see that our students are successful in this world of work and entrepreneurship. Well, yes, I think the first challenge is that they actually land well on the moon rather than coming back, but I know what you mean. Yeah, I know this a little bit early, Joaquin, but for a long time, they've talked about learning through projects and working on skills. Mercedes talked about skills as well. There are consultants who've been talking about skills for decades, so it's not a new issue, but articulating a whole degree around this is quite new. Do you have any preliminary results or any PPIs? Well, what is actually they teaching? What sort of... Yes, it's very interesting. First of all, one of the things we're seeing in the process, and I talked about a change of mindset, is that the student starts to realize that the important thing is not just, it is important, but not just knowing, but what also very important, what are you going to do with what you know? Because we're used to saying, learn this, repeat this. And the exam is just for you to regurgitate what you've learned. But this change of mindset involves saying, look, it's important what you know, but show me that you know what to do with that knowledge. How can you solve problems with this knowledge? And the other main shift in mindset is that the teacher is no longer this figure of knows everyone who just transmits facts, but rather the teacher is the mentor, the coach, who accompanies the student to help the student resolve these problems. Because knowledge, as we know, is on the internet. You could be, and so the teacher needs to have a new role, and that is to help the student to learn to apply this knowledge in real-life situations. There are other things as well, but it really is about this shift of mindset between in universities, teachers, and students? Yes, so the first thing you mentioned is the main criticism of that companies make to universities. They say, look, they transmit a lot of knowledge, but then the students don't know what to do the day they start working, and that's really a priority. And of course, the change in teachers, the concept of mentor coach, the flipped classroom, and all of that. This is very, very interesting. So thank you very much, Joaquin. Now, Victoria. You spent years in different organizations, UNESCO, OECD, helping create bridges between companies and universities. What communities do you think still exist to strengthen this link between them? And do you see any differences according to the region or between developed countries and developing countries? What's your macro view? What's your experience?
Yes, well, this is what we try to do, but this has been our attention, and I'm glad that you've asked about opportunities, because this is what we're not thinking about barriers and volume. So a lot of companies have made progress in that area. So there's also a process of rehabilitation, of learning, of external pressures from governments, the sector of industry, and for universities to be more open, and this is. And that universities should have more contact with different types of players. Some universities are really engines of socio-economic change, and I think we want to congratulate those universities for making that effort of this transition process. And certainly there are universities that have been doing this for many years and doing it very well. You're saying that because Joaquin's there. No, I'd say it even if Joaquin weren't here. Yes, I think I know that what's been going on. So I say this with admiration also, tremendously, and with not with the knowledge behind me. So I think to increase this collaboration between the universities and companies, I think we have to attack this on different fronts. I think that it's not so simple. Obviously, we would have got over these problems a long time ago if it were. But I think we have to standardize certain activities. So the universities, and I think this is perhaps being a bit provocative, but they have to understand that they've lost the monopoly of technological education, because you learn anywhere, anytime, and there are companies that are more advanced than universities in that sense. So universities have to understand that they need to create alliances with perhaps other universities or with industry or with different companies. So this has to be standardized and made something normal and regular, and create spaces and moments where representatives of universities and companies could meet each other, because very often they don't even know each other and they don't know what they can offer each other. So this should become some standardized. This is really a challenge that requires training for the academics as well, because they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to approach these companies. So this should be a joint design process for these courses between the teaching staff and the companies, and particularly what we need to rule out this stigma that exists in many places that collaboration with companies is negative, or that if it's less important or less valuable than But obviously, teachers have that freedom, and this is how it should be, and But we are encouraging consultation and listening and reflection in universities of what's going on outside their world. So I think also it's been very good to have our organisation, because everybody wants to look at these sustainable development goals and participate. So this has been positive, looking at these very complex problems that have complex solutions. And I think university can be an essential part of this, but not just universities. So they have to look for these alliances. And I think universities that weren't so convinced about this, if they look at a social objective to be able to achieve these major challenges, I think we can really move much forward. So we have to institutionalize this, make this official. We need a lot of institutional changes. I think the structures we have at the moment are very rigid, and this is the first thing that has to change to be able to have more experimentation in universities with a much more lean focus and more entrepreneurial. And we have to also look at the elements that I mentioned before. To be able to have a new program, we absolutely have to have this consultation with society to make sure things are relevant, because there are problems that arise that are perhaps not relevant. I think we have to coordinate the different individuals, companies, and coordinate this action between universities and companies, because there's a lot of duplication of effort. We want to avoid this, and it's important that we should, through this institutionalization, that there should be a clear link, which is something that universities have to work at, because it's their social and economic responsibility to be able to prepare young people. And also this must be integrated with research, and also with preparing the staff. The academics need to be ready to do this, and need to be linked with university either formally or informally. And lastly, I think very briefly, this question of public policies. If we start thinking about public universities and contracting, promotion, this is done on a merit system in research in most cases, but this is not the best starting off point. I yesterday read that University of Utrecht in Holland has rejected this approach and is proposing new metrics, which I think is very brave on their part. But these academics that are in that university are also in a global market. So we have to see how many universities get on that train, as it were. I think more universities follow this approach, we will see a major change. And the last thing you commented on differences between more developed and less developed countries. Well, there's many things to say there. I think there's a difference in tradition in the more highly developed countries. There's more tradition in universities in the States, the UK, Australia, or other countries. And then there are countries with a lot more private universities, and they're also bigger companies that it's easier for universities to link up with. So less developed countries have more problems there. So I think also there are better public policies and more stable policies than in less developed countries, and they've been going for a longer time. So this is the major difference, I think.
Thank you very much, Victoria. You've said a lot of interesting things there. We could spend hours discussing these issues, but the issue of metrics and indicators which assess teachers and teaching staff, that's a starting point. Because if the objectives aren't connected to the work market and companies, then there's no real incentive to change. We have a couple of private universities represented here, which don't represent most universities around the world, so it's difficult for us to talk on behalf of the majority of universities. Now, obviously, what happens in ET is very different to what happens in most universities, most public universities. So thank you very much, Victoria. Carlos. Future of work. This study that was done with IBM and CTC, which is filling the skills gap between the work market and reality. What keys would you give to universities? What are the main takeaways of this study? Yes, this study, as I said, was done with the Centre for the Governance of Change within IE and in collaboration with IBM Research and the IBM Foundation. And the question was very simple. The idea was should we take seriously what we usually hear from secondary sources? So 40% of executives in Spain say that they can't find talent in the work market, the talent they need. And we see that there's also 40% youth unemployment in Spain, in other countries as well. So the question that we were asking was, how do you compare what is taught in universities in Europe, in this case, and we could do something similar. We're going to do something similar in the US soon. But how do you compare the content that's taught in Europe with what the work market is asking for? And there's a lot of data on this. The 13 million adverts across European countries. Offering work, job adverts, and then 500,000 work programs amongst these countries. And so we're trying to compare the content of these programs with the content of the work offers. And what we found is, you see, there's a huge variation. How do you explain that some universities are doing it better and some less well when it comes to university degrees with 3 4s, and now there are double degrees, and sometimes they're up to 6 years? And what we saw, first of all, it varies a lot depending on where you do the degree. Even if it has the same name, that can generate up to 8 times more alignment with the work market at the end of this process than in other universities. As I was saying before, the students don't have this information when they're choosing where to study. And also we've seen that generally private universities are better aligned with the work market. And finally, perhaps the most interesting thing, and which we really emphasize in this report, which you can find online, is that what really explains this variation between this the work market of and the alignment of degrees and what is offered as jobs in the work market, we see that the difference is not just about specific content. So it could be technical, whether Jira or Python, and specific modules, but rather from what's called non-cognitive skills. So, for example, teamwork, different forms of communication, ability to learn. And this is what explains how some universities have a much closer relationship to what the work market is offering. It's really to do with those sorts of non-cognitive skills where we see this big difference, rather than in terms of specific factual content. And this is related to the type of issues Victoria was talking about. That is probably the universities where the incentives of these universities are often about research rather than anything else, and where the processes of developing new degrees takes many years, and where the function of the university is not so much about preparing them for what the companies are asking for now, but for careers that could last for 30 years. And the biggest gaps that we see aren't about specific content modules that the work market is asking for, but rather these gaps are based on these sorts of non-cognitive, cross-cutting skills, often related to interpersonal skills, and that's related to the type of work that is more in constant change, where the technical aspects change, and it doesn't make sense to expect a degree that was designed 10 or 20 years ago is going to prepare them for the technical modules that we see now. But the employers want to see those skills related to a more seamless integration with the job market, the job post, the ability to learning skills, teamwork, and other non-cognitive skills, and where there's not so much of an emphasis in practical terms in the universities, not as much as they should. Thank you very much, Carlos. That's interesting, because now we're going to hear from Mercedes. Mercedes started talking about skills at the beginning. Joaquin was also talking about that, and you, all of you have been talking about them. So this is obviously a very important issue when it comes to this this challenge that we're facing in higher education. Mercedes, the eternal return. We're coming back to you. In Generation Spain, you spent more than 7 years working with young people trying to get them jobs. And I'd really like to congratulate you for the work that you've done. It's very important and very praiseworthy. Now, what I understand in technical issues and cloud, and there's a certain bias towards professional training, isn't there? To short programs. For what do you think could be learnt from higher education that you've learnt? And when you want to retrain someone, you know, they're not 18, they've done occupational training, they're 40 or 50, and what do you think the university could learn from what you've learned?
I think for us, first of all, I should say that our methodology, when it was designed, and this is very McKinsey, we started off with initiatives with very mapping is a very McKinsey word, isn't it? Yeah, it wasn't like that before, but yeah. Perhaps it's always been like that. So these are expressions that we all use. So what we're trying to achieve is that there's a social challenge both internationally and nationally. We're working in 14 countries. We've got 3 new offices. We're going to have 17 countries in total. So in most countries, there was a gap between what was demanded by companies, and there were many jobs really not covered. There was nobody with the right profile. So we had this problem at the same time as having unemployment. So what was done was to look at all the initiatives centered on preparation for specific jobs and tackle each one. So I think along these lines, there are 3 critical elements which we could extrapolate to higher education, and we're collaborating with some of the universities to offer boot camps, specific boot camps as it were, to prepare people for these jobs. So we need to train people for the jobs that are really not being covered in companies. And along these lines, these are technical jobs, but when you talk to a company, when they talk about a profile, they say, oh no, I want a Java developer, for example. Okay, this person needs to be able to know how to program Java, but apart from that, they need to be able to talk really confidently with the customers, work in a team successfully, and also be a negotiator, have those skills. So you're not really just looking for someone who can just program Java. You want a professional who's multi-skilled. So when you talk about the Java programmer, you need to be able to do that, but they need to have a whole series of other skills. So for us, I think it's very important, and this is very extrapolatable to higher education, to look at what companies need, not just for jobs that need to be filled. universities are doing this, the ones that are closest to industry. But what does it mean when I give a job title? What does it really mean? What does that job to decode it, as it were? Yeah, because it's always shades of grey, isn't it? So I think it's very important to be able to sit down with companies and understand what they need and be able to offer students these courses. So it's also important when we talk about companies, perhaps as if they were some kind of homogeneous structure, but it's not like that. So if we think of one specific company, whatever, it could be any company. Company A could be great. Well, we found that very often before we develop a specific curriculum, we look at human resources, we look at line managers, we look at the professionals in those jobs, and we've often found that the knowledge of these jobs is different depending on who you talk to. So the decision-making power is not always on the post in terms of what is needed for the job. But I think as a university, they need to know what companies are asking for in nominal terms, as it were, but also conceptually. And I think it's important to be able to that the trainers should be in line with these methods of work. The academics need to be trained to be able to. We've worked with people who haven't gone through this model, that they need to understand the importance of all this question of skill building and mentality and everything. So one important aspect, what do companies know normally, and also in terms of content, we need to have trainers, educators who can do this with tremendous quality and cover all this broad range of skills that need to be passed on to those students. And of course, this is unending. So it's a continuous learning, yes. I think what is needed changes constantly. So I think it was very interesting. We've looked at 12 to 14-week courses because they're very job-orientated. We want people who do these courses are already working or about to enter a new job, which will mean that they'll need those skills. But also, I think that it's vital to be able to accompany those people continuously and be able to create in them, well, I think I've managed to, this idea of I finally managed to learn this, but in 2 years' time, I might be in a new situation, have to learn new things. So I think I wanted to emphasize a couple of things that were said. One thing that is stuck in my mind, and probably most people who are listening have thought this too, they've heard hundreds of times that it's parents are king, as it were. In education, I think Joaquin said that Google and Amazon will be telling us what we have to study or what we have to do. It won't be parents. So the parents, in a way, are Google and Amazon. Before it used to be fathers or mothers who'd say, "Oh no, you can't study that. Oh no, that's no good for your future." So I think orientation is a vital point. This has come out, but this is a critical question, this orientation, and also very closely linked this. When we look at the process of selection, our courses have to be adapted to the content they need, but also the skills that those students have. So what are they good at, and what are they bad at, and what do they want to study? Because there's a thing going on called the element. You have to know what your aptitudes are, what makes you feel, what are you passionate about, what are you good at, and where is the opportunity? It's the intersection between different skills. So I think it's very important to accompany our students in this direction. I think the universities can do this really well. And also, I think it's very important to look at certification of the public sector is important there. We haven't talked about this. Are we being pushed towards specific situations? I think qualifications are given to us by the people who are doing the courses, university. But if you look at LinkedIn, there's a platform, there's a learning platform that they've set up. They presuppose certain knowledge behind courses. I think that's a major step. I think the limitation we see in Spain at the moment is, what do we value? What is valued by universities or companies? This is a nightmare. I think we have to be strict. We need good teachers in universities, but there's a bit of a maladjustment there, I think, that Victoria mentioned, between the quality of teaching and research. So I think I'm looking at the impact that this has on universities that have less flexibility to adapt because they're in a more rigid framework, thinking about the public sector. So this is something we may need to adapt to tremendously. It's very important to understand what companies need in nominal terms, in content terms, look at our selection process and adapt this to fit. And also, we really need to, our teachers and our teaching staff need to be orientated to this. So we're taking small steps, and I think we have to continue advancing. And I think companies will thank us for this, and individuals, because they'll be more prepared and more happier in their professional job and also in life.
Yes, I absolutely agree, except with the sort of an echo, which I'm not going to give an opinion on. But I don't know how many people who are here who are listening to us. I'm sure a lot of them know, of people who are in 30, 40, 50 and they're unemployed. I suppose, do you work with these sort of people every day? And I imagine that you might think, they're probably thinking, what should I have done differently? And so the question for those who are not in that situation but could be at risk, what sort of recommendations would you give to these sort of people of that age? What should they be concerned about?
Lo primero que les diría,
First thing I would say to them would be, it's not your fault. The labour market is very complex. I'm 53, so I know exactly what situation people are in when you are that age and you've seen many changes. So perhaps you've not had the opportunity, even if you'd had the interest, you've not had the opportunity to be in the right place for what you need to know at the specific moment. I don't think it's not a question of thinking I've done something wrong, or perhaps you have, and perhaps you've been in the wrong place at the wrong time. So this is important, because really what it's all about is we have to be able to continue developing our skills and enjoy what we do. So what do we have to do? Well, I think for me it's very important, first of all, not to lose hope or enthusiasm, and the hope to be able to be where I can be hired. I'm talking about knowledge, skills. And lastly, I need to look at what fits me, what suits me most, and what I most want to do. So we've done a program which I love for professionals that work in a call center. And this is within the company, and they do process automation. We have fantastic people in processing automation, because they know the process. I know it's obvious, really. We look at call centers. We phone them. You say, you hear this voice saying, "Touch, dial 2, dial 4, press." So there's a whole process behind this. And these people know this process, but it's very much demanded. In demand, this kind of skills. So we have to look at where there's a gap and where we can get people into those jobs, people who know how to do this kind of job. But we do have to get through a cultural change. So I think that there is space for movement there. So if you've been lucky to be in an environment where you've had opportunities to continue doing courses and learning, this is great because it's great fun.
Yes, and I think this issue of self-esteem is very important as well, isn't it? You know, you have to work on these psychological aspects. I think it's very important. Thank you very much, Mercedes. We've got a couple of minutes left. Can we connect the people who are joining us, the speakers online? Are there any questions from the public, from the audience? I've got 7 or 8 questions to ask, but I don't have time. Yes, we have a question here. Go ahead. Yes, for someone who's often changed their job a number of times, and they're now, for example, working in administration, how can you sell yourself to a company? Because recruiters, they see these changes and they tend not to like them. So how do you think you can present it as a strong point? Yes, I'm gonna maybe ask that question a different way to maybe see if Victoria Jualos Acarquin would like to answer that. So a person who's got an administrative profile, how can they sell this experience to be able to get to another job that's not in administration? Well, I mean, I work in various different positions, not just administrative things relating to sales or customer service, and now I'm more focused on administration. But how could I sell the different sort of jobs that I've been in, like customer service and sales? How can I sell it as a strong point? You know, as an asset. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Would someone like to answer? Victoria, Joaquin, Carlos. Would anyone like to answer? Victoria, I can see she really wants to answer the question. I can see it in your non-verbal communication.
Yes, very quickly. This is very common, and we see this more and more. We will see it more and more to have a less linear degree course. So I think we need to look at these cross-sectional abilities that people have in jobs, and this is what employers will look for. And you need to look at what will motivate you in a specific job. So it's about forgetting processes and I also turning things around the other way. I've had experiences in different sectors, and you might think I can be better as a professional in this sector or that sector, and they will do better than people who have more linear professional life. So we're jumping from academic life to university, to companies, to industry, to administration, which is what I've done. And so I think because of all the experiences people have had, it's possible to see problems in very different ways that other people can't do because you've had all those different careers.
Thank you very much, Victoria. We've got time for one more question. Yes, please go ahead. Yes, thanks very much. Here's a question for Joaquin or anyone really. Now we're talking about this Tech 21, this huge change in terms of search and teaching through projects. Now what I see here is there's this big change of changing teachers. How do you teach the teachers and accompany them through this change of approach? And I was also saying that you don't allow teachers to start without prior training for teachers. So I was wondering if you could perhaps give us a bit of help and explaining how you've done this process, because I understand first you need to identify the need, but then you need to train the trainers to be able to teach differently. Yes, how do you accompany them? How do you train the teachers? Yes, I think that Joaquin, perhaps that's for you. That's something that's the last one we're going to be able to ask. Joaquin, what have you done? What have you learned there? Yes, for any kind of transformation in the universities, a big shift like this, the teachers are the absolute foundation of this. So we need to work a lot with the teachers, first of all, to understand why this change is important, and then we need to accompany them by training them. There are a lot of training centres for the teachers where we accompany them through this process. We give them the tools they need, and it's important for them to understand why this is important, and that the university uses the right incentives. Now, often we want to do something, and it says, like, put your money where your mouth is, and a lot of people say, well, I want to do this, and the teachers say, okay, but we need incentives. And it's not just economic incentives, there are other types of incentives. So the teacher can say, look, this is worth it, this is a change. Like any kind of uncertainty, any kind of change is scary at first, they don't understand it. But then if they're well accompanied and well trained, and on top of that, they're given incentives within their degree, within their career as a teacher, then it's something that they like. And so I'd like to be able to give further details, but those are the main ideas. So we need accompaniment, training, and incentives. So those are the main things. Yes, that's very interesting. There's some universities that are experimenting with redefining the role of the teacher. And a lot of teachers so far had to do research and teach. But the universities where they're changing this percentage. They say, well, why does it have to be 50-50? Why can't it be 80-20 or 90-10 or even 100% 0%? Because there are a lot of people who are more focused on one activity rather than the other, and they enjoy doing one rather than the other one. So the system's also been very rigid and continues to be very rigid in many places. Look, we have to finish now, otherwise they're going to throw me out. So, first of all, I'd like to thank the speakers, Victoria, Joaquin, Carlos, and remotely, and Teresa here with us, Mercedes. And I'm going to try and summarize everything that's been said, because a lot of points have been raised, but we've got a lot of opportunities ahead, a lot of challenges as representatives of higher education. But it's great to see that there are people who are so intelligent and working on this, and so that's my consolation today. Now, as representative of IE University, we're really happy to be collaborating with Fundación Telefónica Foundation. Thank you very much for that. And there's a work group that's going to start working in 10 minutes on some of the things that have been said. I wish them the best of luck to help them to prepare the conference in October. Thank you very much to all of you for coming. Thanks to the interpreters. Thanks to the people who are following us online. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you.